What's up, everybody? Welcome to On West Gray, the monthly podcast about all things local government in the city of Norman. I'm your host, Tiffany Verska, Chief Communications Officer for the city of Norman, and we appreciate you joining us. Today in the studio, we have with us Kyle Arthur of the Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District, John Harrington of the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, and our very own Nathan Madenwald, City of Norman Utilities Engineer. They've joined us to discuss the status and future of water in Norman to include lake longevity and our aquifer. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning. We're so happy to have you. So as part of AIM Norman, or our Area and Infrastructure Master Plan, which is currently underway and is comprised of strategic updates to plans for both water and wastewater in Norman, we've been discussing natural resources even more often than we usually do around here. We'd really like to give listeners an overview of what our water supply looks like at this time and what we foresee in the future when it comes to water in the community. So first, could each of you give a brief introduction about who you are, your field of expertise, or the type of business that you oversee at your agencies each day? John, can we start with you?
Sure. My name is John Harrington. I work for the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments and the Garber Wellington Association. Basically, it was an organization formed under ACOG specifically to generate information and explore the Garber Wellington Aquifer, which I've been doing for 35 years, something like that. I'm a geologist, and my field of expertise is geology and geophysics.
Wonderful. Kyle?
Yeah, my name is Kyle Arthur. I'm the general manager at the Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District, which is out at Lake Thunderbird. The district was formed in 1959 through statutory authority in Title 82 of the Oklahoma State Statutes, which deals with water and water rights. The district provides raw water supply from Lake Thunderbird and has since about 1965, when the lake was finished, to the cities of Norman, Midwest City, and Del City.
All right. Thank you, sir. And Nathan?
Yes, Nathan Madenwald, Utilities Engineer, City of Norman. And my job is to plan and manage capital projects for our utilities department focused on water, wastewater, and solid waste.
So you collaborate or communicate often with these other gentlemen, right?
Very regularly.
All right. So Kyle, we'll kick off the questions with you. Can you speak to us about the longevity of Lake Thunderbird, our largest source of drinking water here in Norman at this time?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So two things I commonly hear from the public, whether it's casual conversation or public meetings or presentations about Lake Thunderbird and its role as a public water supply, is that it's sedimenting in, typically characterized as at an alarming rate, and that it has a very short lifespan, and we're coming up on that lifespan. And so I want to think a little bit about those two questions. Certainly there's some truth there for sure, but some context and some additional information I think is important to understand those issues as it relates to Lake Thunderbird and in particular Norman's future water supply. To do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of a reservoir. And so we often see a reservoir, or Lake Thunderbird in this case, sort of from the top, but let's turn it on its side and look at it from a side profile. And you can sort of stratify or divide any reservoir, frankly, Lake Thunderbird included, into different layers. And moving from the top to the bottom, we have what's called the dead pool storage, which is the very bottom segment of the lake. And the terms that are often used are what I just said. Pool or storage are names broadly that are given to those levels. So at the bottom, as I said, you have the dead pool storage. And then as you move up from that, usually the biggest part of a reservoir is what's called the conservation storage pool, which is kind of where the fun happens. That's where the public water supply comes from. That's where fish and wildlife propagate. That's where people recreate, whether it be boat or fish or whatever the case may be. And then the topmost layer is called the flood pool storage. So that's where floodwaters are stored when we have rain events, just like we did last night and have over the last week or so. There can be other storage pools and reservoirs. You could have a storage pool to produce hydroelectric power. We do not at Lake Thunderbird. You could have a storage pool that has releases downstream to float boats for navigation, right? We do not have that at Lake Thunderbird. Normally, what we have are the normal three levels. So when reservoirs are constructed, there is that bottom layer that is contemplated to store sediment that comes into the lake over time. And so they design the reservoir in a manner so as to absorb or take in and store at that very lowest level, below where we can intake water, by the way, to provide to Norman, Midwest City, and Del City. They have a zone down there that they designed back in the late 50s and early 1960s to absorb that sediment. And so we've been depositing sediment over time into that pool or into that level. And in fact, recent studies have shown that we're actually sedimenting in that pool storage area, that dead pool storage area, at a slower rate than was originally planned and calculated. So that's good news for sure. But the more important point of the matter is where we get our water supply, where Norman gets it, Midwest City and Del City get it, is not from the dead pool storage area, right? So as that fills up, which it's doing now, it's not affecting our water supply. So the calculation that was done looked at 100-year life of the reservoir in terms of filling up that dead pool storage. So the calculation was targeted towards saying 100 years from now, right, from 1965, that we want to say the dead pool storage is now full, right? And only once it gets past dead pool storage level will it start to affect conservation storage level. And that's where we get our water supply. So right now, the sediment that's going in is going into its own little storage area where it was designed to go and not affecting the volume of water. Now, will it eventually fill the dead pool storage and start to eat into, for lack of a better term, our conservation storage where we get our water supply? Yes, it will. But it is sedimenting in at a slower rate. So that is particularly good news. It's important to understand, too, that we have a permit, the district does, from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board to deliver 21,600 acre feet of water per year. That's a little over 7 billion gallons of water that the district has a right from the Water Resources Board to deliver. We don't deliver quite that much. Norman takes their full allocation. The other two cities do not. But in any given year, there's far more water than that. There's about 5 times as much water in conservation storage typically in the reservoir. So that's kind of more of a worst case scenario. So even in times of drought, and even if we start creeping from the sediment pool, dead pool storage up into conservation storage, there's a lot of room in there to absorb that 21,600 acre feet that we need to deliver.
So the sediment pool or the dead pool that you were referring to, you said that we're in good shape, where it's actually filling up at a slower pace than what we predicted. Right. So do you have an estimated timeline, or does it just depend on a lot of different factors?
It depends on a lot of different factors. So one of the major factors would be practices and behaviors in the watershed above the lake, right? How it is we develop in Norman, and for that matter, Moore and Oklahoma City as well, because their city limits are in the watershed of Thunderbird, not just Norman, but Norman has the biggest share in the watershed. So our practices in the watershed to prevent sediment runoff and sediment loading into the lake will have an effect. As far as a point in time that's been calculated, no, I don't have that and haven't calculated that. But yes, it's good news in the sense that it seems that maybe we're pushing the time horizon out. And the better we can do in the watershed, the farther out it would seem reasonable to say that we will push that date. But the date will come.
Sure.
Nature will reclaim. Now, there's another misconception that I've heard that in 100 years from the date it was constructed, you'll walk out to what was once Calypso Cove or Clear Bay or somewhere on Alameda, And you'll look out at the lake, and it'll just be kind of like a soupy mud puddle, right? It'll almost not exist anymore, and that's not the case. Like I said, there's over 100,000 acre-feet of conservation storage. Acre-foot is a measure, unit of measure for water. It's the amount of water it takes to cover 1 acre of land 1 foot deep. So about 326,000 gallons. So I use the term acre-foot. That's what I mean when I say that. But so there's a lot of capacity in the reservoir. But make no mistake, the behaviors of today and the decisions we make today in the watershed will affect the usability of the reservoir as we move into the future.
Sure. And these layers or pools that you've referred to, is it your agency that's kind of charged with monitoring and measuring those different layers?
So, we have a gauge that where we measure the lake elevation on a continuous basis. We manage the reservoir from the perspective, the Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District does, from the perspective of managing primarily the water supply infrastructure that delivers the raw water to the 3 cities. We also manage the dam itself. All the property, all the infrastructure, all the equipment is still owned by the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation. We manage it essentially under a contract with them and have since the very beginning. That's been the arrangement. It continues to be so. Just like Oklahoma Department of Tourism and Rec manage the recreational aspects out of the lake under an agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation, the federal government also. So we measure lake level, back to your question. When there is water in that flood pool, that top level, the decisions that are made about whether to release out the gates down Little River, so through the dam, that water, or to hold it, is not our decision. It is decision of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Tulsa District. So we report every day what has come in, what our lake level is, right? How much rain we've gotten, how much evaporation in the summertime that we've gotten, because that's an output, right? You lose water through evaporation, and then how much we've pumped out to the 3 cities. And based upon that information, and then all the different lakes they're also managing, particularly downstream of Thunderbird, they make a decision about whether we are to release water or not release water. So we make minimal operational decisions on the lake level. That's really, we more report and then respond to what the Tulsa District of the Corps of Engineers ask us to do.
All right. Sounds like a lot of collaboration and communication. Who knew that lakes were so complicated, right, guys? Yeah. So, all right. So that is some wonderful information from you. Thank you for sharing that with us, sir. John, could you share with us a little bit about aquifers? Are they drying up? We've heard a little bit of chatter about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, there are at least 24 bedrock aquifers in the state, and probably just as many alluvial aquifers. Okay, so whenever you hear news about the aquifer drying up, the one that's probably they're probably talking about is the Ogallala, which is out in western Oklahoma. Okay, and yes, that is a serious matter out there. The Garber Wellington aquifer, which is what we're on, no, there's not a problem. As a matter of fact, we had 2 years ago we had static water levels that were the highest in more than a decade. And so, we're now we've backed off a little bit in the last 2 years because of the drought, but we're looking fine as far as quantity goes.
Okay. So the wells that the city of Norman uses and pumps from, is that all coming from the same source that private well owners are using, or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
I want to answer yes and no. Okay.
So yes,
because yes, it's complicated. Okay. When we talk about the Garber Wellington aquifer, a lot of people think of this massive, underground lake. First of all, it doesn't behave anything like a lake. Okay. So if you think it behaves like a lake, you need to kind of set that idea aside and think about more like saturated sponges. And because that's kind of the way they act. In the Garber Wellington, you have a series of sandstone units, about a dozen, actually, of sandstone units each one of them acting kind of on its own, okay? So consequently, the domestic well owners generally will drill down the first 200 feet, and they'll tap into three of these, the top three, okay? City of Norman usually bypasses those three, and they usually start looking for water around 300 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet. And so consequently, although you're in the quote-unquote same aquifer, you're actually tapping different sandstone units, okay? So that way, I can say that they're not really sharing the same water as your domestic well owners are.
Is it fair to say that the sandstone units are, maybe you could think of those as like layers, or?
Well, actually almost like individual little aquifer layers.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, they're really fairly different. As a matter of fact, you generally have different chemistry between each one of them. So that's why we know that they don't communicate very well between. If you got a nice 20 or 30 foot shale in between the two sandstone layers, they probably don't communicate.
I've also heard the city of Norman was founded as a groundwater city, meaning that we didn't even originally have a lake to pull from. So during our founding, I guess we just
Okay,
pulled water
let's
from
go
aquifer.
back to our founder. Okay.
Okay.
Who is?
Abner Norman, right?
Okay, and what did he do?
What did he do?
He was a surveyor.
Yes.
Okay, he surveyed for the railroads. Okay, so when you're surveying for the railroads, what are you looking for? Remember, this was back during steam engine times. You're looking for water. As a matter of fact, he set up camp down at right around the OU duck pond. And then, because there was a nice spring there, then he proceeded to go northward, and there was a really nice spring at Andrews Park. And that's the direction that the railroad took. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why the streets in downtown Norman are all cattywampus. They don't go north-south. It's because they go parallel and orthogonal to the railroad, okay? And so you could say that, the centralized planning for the first few years was really dependent upon groundwater. And the first water wells that were really drilled for the city were actually in Andrews Park. So that's how Norman developed. It was originally, and quite frankly, this is also the way probably most cities in the Midwest were founded. I could probably guarantee you that in any city that was founded in the early 1900s probably has a water well within a quarter mile of the intersection of Broadway and Main Street, okay? It's because people needed railroads. They were very dependent upon railroads. The railroads were dependent upon water, and they were very dependent upon groundwater, springs.
All right. So I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Kyle, but I was hoping one of you could speak in general terms to me about water rights in Oklahoma.
Kyle?
Who gets the $1 million question?
He may be a little bit more.
Sure, I can give you the 35,000-foot overview. So
Okay.
In Oklahoma, groundwater and surface water are permitted from a water rights perspective separately. Groundwater is a private property right, subject to reasonable regulation by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, which basically revolves around regulating the quantity that you can take as a private property owner overlying a groundwater basin, one of the many that John was referencing. So it's a private property right. Cities can use platted lands, as I recall. I'm reaching back in my memory banks here a little bit. So if I misspeak, John, correct me. But use platted lands to dedicate that overlie a groundwater basin, an aquifer, and get water from that aquifer. And that's, of course, how Norman has its wells. Surface water. So surface water meaning something flowing down a defined channel with bed and banks, a creek, a stream, a river. which ultimately can terminate or partially terminate in a lake. That's all surface water. And surface water is the property of the public. So no one individual outside of domestic rights has any rights to water flowing by in a stream. It's public water, also subject to regulation by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. So.
Okay. And a good place maybe for folks to read further into water rights would be through the Oklahoma Water Resources Board?
Yes. They've got some good information online and fact sheets, and you bet.
Okay, wonderful.
I might want to add a little bit as far as groundwater rights go. We get a lot of Texans up here, and they have a little bit different way of looking at things. See, in Texas, you own your groundwater rights all the way to the center of the earth, okay? And that's yours. In Oklahoma, we don't look at it that way. You own a share of the total aquifer, okay? So it's a bit different, and so you get interpretations that are much different than what you would do south of the Red River.
Oklahomans know that sharing is caring.
Sharing
right?
is caring. In this case, yes. So not only do you you have sharing and caring, but you also domestic wells versus municipal wells. You do have a domestic right to water. You can drill on your property and use it for domestic purposes, which is generally, your family, and also maybe growing, a pretty nice large garden like my grandmother did.
Sure.
So it was really large. And so consequently, you can do that. But once you get too much beyond that, then we start saying, okay, you are going to need to get a permit from the Water Resources Board. So there's a point where it becomes non-domestic, or if you really are, have a huge garden and you're really kind of starting to make an industry out of it and you're really making profit and stuff like that, then you can start sliding over across that boundary to commercial purposes. And then that's when you really do need to get a commercial well permit type of thing.
Right. So it's very important, folks that might be interested in having their own well, that they do some research into this and see what any rules or regulations may exist within their state or municipality. It's
always good to research if you're on domestic water, domestic well, how your well is constructed. I always recommend getting a good water chemistry analysis. And also, I highly recommend doing a little bit of historical research. If you want, I got the aerial photos back to 1940 for most of the Garber Wellington. You'd be
so
surprised.
You're the
guy. Yeah, you'd be surprised at how many people go out and build a house and put down a well, and they happen to be in the middle of an old oil and gas field. And then they start wondering why they're getting salt water. So you need to do research, because you may be in a vintage oil and gas field, and they didn't really do environmental regulations very well back in the 40s.
Sure.
So just saying.
All right. So research is everything.
It is.
So Nathan, can you talk a little bit about when and how the city may come into making decisions about drilling new wells?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So John gave us some good history on where Norman's been with groundwater wells and where kind of how we got to this point. So groundwater is a vital component of our water supply. It supplies about 30% of our water, though that varies from year to year depending on precipitation, demands, what our customers need. So when we look to decide if we're going to drill additional wells, it's a very involved process with the city of Norman. In 2014, we developed the 2060 Strategic Water Supply Plan. It was a very lengthy, involved process where we had a lot of stakeholders help us decide what our water future would be. As a component of that, the recommendation was for us to drill 10 new wells in our groundwater system. We've done 9, so we've actually hit the amount that we want, but we want to drill one more well just to help our supply a little bit. So we're working to do that, also drill another well to replace a well that has failed. But then, as you mentioned at the beginning, the AIM Norman effort, we're going to look at water supply. We did the 2060 plan, but how is that plan tracking? Do we need to make some course corrections? And so we will reevaluate our water supply options, and groundwater will be a component that we'll evaluate as part of that study.
Okay, so might be a silly question, but especially for folks that are not involved in master planning for cities. So you said this is a 2060 water supply plan that you had talked about. So it's 2024. So how does that, is this like where we want to be in 2060? Is this something that we want to accomplish like way before then? How do those timelines, I guess, work out?
Oh, no, really good question. So yeah, when we say 2060 strategic water supply plan, we're looking at what is that population growth that we would envision to happen by 2060? What is that associated water demand that we will need to be able to provide to our customers so people can use water in the way that they want? So yeah, we're looking at what steps do we need to take to make sure as population grows, we're staying ahead of that with our water supply.
Got it. Okay. And can you also shed some light, and I think we've talked just a little bit about it, but on overall resource stability? So we've discussed water from the lake, water from the aquifer, and we also purchase water from Oklahoma City. So what does that look like for us, and why do we do that?
Yeah, so similarly to the groundwater, when we did the strategic water supply plan, we also made the decision that we want to purchase water from Oklahoma City. We buy about 1 million gallons of water per day from them, just kind of a flat rate that we buy. And that's about 8% of our annual usage. We buy that water at a set rate from them. So we know the price. It's something that's published in their city ordinances. And I just wanted to note that it's a little bit different than the water that we purchased from Oklahoma City in the past. In the early 2000s, we bought water from them on a on-demand basis, and the rate was a lot higher because we're saying, hey, we really need water because everybody's using it. And at the same time, all our customers are saying, hey, we really need water because everyone's using it. So that was at a higher rate. Now we're at a more reasonable rate, something that we know and we can plan for. Oklahoma City is a regional water supplier. They actually serve 19 to 20 utilities or cities within the metro area. And their top 7 customers are other cities. So that is something that they do as their line of business. So you heard the phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So we'd like to think, don't get all your water from one bucket. So by having 3 water supplies, that helps us be a little more reliable and resilient for our customers. So if we have a 42-inch water main break outside of our water treatment plant and we have to shut that down, we can ask Oklahoma City to use a little bit more water from them on that emergency basis, turn up our water wells, and then we're still able to meet that customer demand while we work through those issues. So having those 3 sources has been a great insurance for us to make sure we're still meeting our customer demands with the minimum impact level of service. So we would see Oklahoma City, groundwater, and Lake Thunderbird for, I know Kyle won't say it's there for forever, but it's going to be there for a really long time, longer than that 100-year life that they're saying. So we're planning to keep using those moving forward. But then also when we do the AIM Norman study, look at, are there other options that we need to consider, or do we need to just maybe strengthen those supply sources?
Yes, and I think that process is coming along really well. We're expecting to have some results and findings on AIM Norman by the end of the year. So folks can look out for that at normanok.gov or at public meetings. So do we foresee drought coming anytime soon? I know Oklahomans are very familiar with that. Most of us have lived through it. But are there reliable tools or data in place, in your opinions, to really predict that sort of thing? Whoever wants to take it.
I'll jump in on that one. Predicting drought, I'm not a climatologist or meteorologist. I know a few people that I could recommend, but the bottom line is that drought is, in terms of actually predicting it, like tomorrow the drought starts. No, we don't do that. But there are always tendencies. For example, we are going from an El Nino to a La Nina condition over the next 4 or 5 months, and when we have La Ninas, our climate generally, as a general rule, tends to be a bit drier and warmer. So we are already, the state is already a third in drought. Third of Oklahoma right now is in drought. So I expect it to get worse, not necessarily better. as far as drought affecting our local water supplies, so far this year, actually, our recharge rates have been right on track for the aquifer. Now, that's saying since the aquifer is 2,000 square miles, some areas are getting it better than others, and Norman happens to be one that's getting it better than others. So you consider yourself lucky, actually, guys. But as it's no doubt in my mind that a year from now we will probably be in a little bit worse drought situation than we are in now, and recharge rates will probably decline. I'm trying to remember who it was that says when you're in, Oklahoma, if you're not coming out of a drought, you're going into one, right. And that's about where we are right now. We are starting to going to probably slide into another one, within 3 to 6 months.
So what exactly comprises a drought? How would you define that? I know you talked about climate, you talked about lake levels. I mean, is it all of those things?
That is $1 million question, because drought means something to different people in different disciplines. Mm-hmm. Okay. A drought to a farmer can mean 3 weeks without any rain. Okay. A drought to a climatologist, they actually have very defined scoring, so to speak, to define what a drought is. But, and then if you go into the groundwater world, well, I look at it, a drought where we have, when static water levels fall and then come back up again, that's a drought situation when they fall. It's a good recharge rate when they start coming back up. And so, I look at things probably a little bit longer term
sure.
than your local meteorologist when it comes to drought. So are we in a drought? I would say that since a third of the Oklahoma is in technically drought, yes, we're probably. Now, Cleveland County at the moment is not in the drought area, but you go up north to like Alfalfa County, yes, they're definitely in a drought. So
maybe just to add on to what John is saying. So yeah, it changes very quickly in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. So as water supply professionals, we always just kind of think a drought is coming and prepare for it.
So always conserve. Yes. Year-long conserving here in Norman, right?
Yeah. If we can use water wisely and make sure we've got enough to get us through those tough times. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So plan for the worst, hope for the best.
All right. That odd, even watering and all of the Water Wednesday tips we put out. Yeah, we're always encouraging that conservation attitude.
However, as far as looking at the beginning of a drought, we're in good shape. We really are. All the reservoirs are full. The aquifer looks pretty good, So, if we're going to have a drought, we're ready. I feel comfortable that we can't get it much better than we are right now.
All right, as long as people keep conserving, right?
Yeah,
and acting
that's right. Keep it. let's not water our lawns on a summer afternoon. Okay, just don't do that.
All right. So through strategic communication efforts at the City of Norman, we've made a bigger push recently to focus on messaging related to water protection and water conservation, as I just mentioned. So with 3 water experts on today, can you tell us in your own words why those things are important, community or statewide?
Sure. I'll take that to start off. So water protection, water conservation. I'm taking water protection to mean particularly as it relates to water quality, right? And so behaviors, as I mentioned earlier, in the watershed do affect the quality of the water, speaking specifically here about Lake Thunderbird. They do affect the quality of the water that's in the lake and then ultimately that you drink. Now, Norman, Midwest City, and Del City do a fantastic job treating it. But certainly from both an aesthetic perspective when you're at the lake, as well as the treatability and the extent to which water needs to be treated by those 3 cities, those are greatly affected by the quality of the water that's in the lake. So when we think about behaviors in the watershed that affect the quality, we primarily think about sediment loading, right, that causes suspended solids or turbidity or a lack of clarity. We know that certainly about the water that's in Thunderbird. We also think about nutrients, right? nitrogen and phosphorus primarily from fertilizing activities that make their way into our bucket known as Lake Thunderbird, and there they get mixed and provide great food for the growth of algae, and algae become unsightly. Algae can, through their life cycle, their entire life cycle, can impact dissolved oxygen levels in fish populations. And then ultimately that algae will die and fall to the bottom and be broken down by other organisms. And then the lake turns over. We have taste and odor issues, and people don't like taste and odor issues, me included.
Right.
And so on the cycle goes. So really, it really, though, starts upstream. And so protection of the water, this protection of the quality of the water that's running off, which is where we get all the water for Thunderbird. We get it from runoff, is critically important. On the conservation side, we talked about that dead pool storage that we have at the bottom of the lake, and that it was designed to fill and take the sediment, and that's going at a little slower rate than we thought, which is great. But eventually it will start to impact that conservation storage, that profile, that segment of the lake where we do get our drinking water. So how do you stretch the supply, conservation, and using only what you need, right? And using it smartly and efficiently. Doesn't put more water in the lake per se, but it makes it go farther, which in a sense arguably accomplishes the same thing, or at least very similarly. Back to water protection and water quality. Also, if we can prevent sediment from going in there, we're slowing the deposition rate, right, of that sediment that's going into the dead pool, and hopefully pushing that time frame out. One thing I wanted to say, now I'm shifting back to conservation, so kind of going back and forth on these two things.
It's okay, you're all on topic.
Yeah,
Good job.
well, great. Glad to hear it. So on conservation, kind of going back to the drought discussion we were having a moment ago, obviously that's our biggest threat, right, really is drought. Groundwater and every aquifer is different, behaves differently than surface water does, and aquifer does in drought situations. Our lake is certainly susceptible to drought, and in a drought situation, obviously, less water coming in, less water than ultimately is available. To give you some context about that and the importance of conservation in terms of the amount of water that we use. So I mentioned that we have a permit from the Water Resources Board to withdraw in any given year 21,600 acre feet of water, which is, like I said, a little over 7 billion gallons of water. So, and I also mentioned that in conservation storage in that section of the lake, we have far more water than that in any given year. But on the opposite end, it can get quite severe. So the recent calculations for the lake would say that our firm yield, which is the amount of water that could be delivered in the drought of record. So the drought, all we have is the past. Right? We talked about predicting drought. The only way you know you're really in a drought is when you're in one, and then you know you're in one. Right? Sure. When did it start and when's it going to end? Who knows? But you know it when you see it. But it's hard to see it coming, right? Mm-hmm. So what we have to rely on in terms of modeling sort of that vulnerability for a lake is to look to the past. That's our best information, right? So when we look to the past and we look to the drought of record in central Oklahoma, we look to the 1950s. And in the 1950s, if the lake had existed then, which it did not, but if it had, and we were trying to deliver 21,000 acre feet in the mid-1950s, we would not have been able to deliver 21,600 acre feet. We would have, we think, been able to deliver about 12,500 to 13,000 acre feet. So not quite half, a little more than half. So there can be very wide swings, right? So no, back to Nathan's point about not putting all your eggs in one basket, this is why. Sure. These sources are vulnerable to forces we can't control. And so conservation in terms of usage and what we call demand management, another term for conservation, is critically important to stretch those supplies during those times in particular.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And there's some great guidance and tips from our Division of Environmental Resilience and Sustainability at greennorman.org. So anybody can visit that webpage and get some really great information. Is there anything else that you gentlemen would like to share with our listeners?
Other than use best management practices when it comes to groundwater. A lot of times, if it doesn't run off your property and go into the lake, it's going to go down into the aquifer. And then it's going to sit there until you pump it back out again.
Right.
And it may not. Matter of fact, I'm reminded of a situation one time. I had a water well that people said it was just beginning to taste funny, and they didn't know why. Well, it turns out that in the shed, back in the garage, there was an old abandoned water well, and the gentleman was disposing used motor oil down the. Yeah. Oh okay. But it's one of those things. He wasn't putting two and two together, and he didn't understand, what where his water was coming from. He didn't have a good grasp and understanding of the aquifer, and so he thought it was perfectly fine.
Oh my!
Yeah, that was an interesting situation. But the bottom line is, learn best management practices. Think about what you're doing. Go ahead and take your hazardous materials and put them in the proper places. Dispose of them properly, so it doesn't get into the water cycle. Basically.
Yes. One water, it's all connected. All the water
it all is connected, believe it or not.
All the water we have today is all the water we'll ever have, so we have to take care of it, right? Mm-hmm. All right, well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us this morning on the show. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Questions or commentary about On West Gray can be sent into publicaffairs@normanok.gov. Shouts to our producer and editor, Mr. Bryce Holland of the City of Norman Communications Office. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and always remember to cast your ballot. I'm Tiffany Verska. Thank you for joining us on West Gray.